This is David, the world's most famous sculpture, and it almost never got made. It was carved out of an imposing 17-foot block of marble, nearly 2 stories high, that was already damaged. A giant block of marble that had been sitting abandoned in the open for nearly 26 years. The most famous sculptors of its time said it was impossible to carve anything out of this. And that is how it remained until a 26-year-old eccentric, creative maverick stepped up to that challenge. His name was Michelangelo Buonarroti, and he carved the most beautiful sculpture the world had ever seen, releasing David from within that monumental prison. Welcome, I'm Arvind Vijay Mohan, and today we are going inside the story of how the world's most celebrated sculpture almost never existed, and what this tells us about the things that we give up on and the people who don't. This is a story about Florence in 1501, about a monumental block of marble with a massive hole in it, about 2 sculptors who failed, one city that had almost run out of hope, and one young man who saw in that damaged piece of stone something that nobody else could see. Movement 1, the world before. Florence, 1464. The city is at the height of the Renaissance, which means it is at the height of a particular extraordinary obsession. The belief that beauty is not decoration, but in fact truth. That to make something beautiful with complete precision is a form of devotion. That art is not less serious than philosophy or science. It is the same thing, just expressed differently. The overseers of the Office of the Works of Florence Cathedral, the men responsible for the building and decoration of the city's most important and powerful church, want to commission a series of 12 large sculptures that are going to be placed along the roofline. Figures from the Old Testament, a statement of Florence's cultural and spiritual ambition to the world. For the first figure, they commission a sculptor named Agostino de Duccio. They purchase a monumental 17-foot block of Carrara marble, the finest marble in the world, from the quarries in the mountains above Tuscany. This is the same stone that the ancient Romans used. Now I want you to consider how imposing a 17-foot block of marble truly is. It's nearly 2 stories tall. It's imposing in its very grand form. You approach that block and are instantly dwarfed by it. So Agostino steps up and begins work, and then stops. The precise reason is still not known. Some accounts suggest that he quarreled with the overseers. Others suggest that he simply found the scale too ambitious. Understandably, as I'd outlined, 17 foot of marble is a mountain. Whatever the reasons, in 1466, Agostino walks away from that block. He's barely gotten started, though he's made some moves. There's a rough, unformed shape emerging. Some historians believe that he had begun to work on the legs, and a section has been cut away near the top in a way that kind of limits what any future sculptor can do with it. He does this, and then he's gone. The block sits. 10 years later, in 1746, the overseers try again. They commission a second sculptor, Antonio Rossellino, one of the most respected craftsmen in all of Florence. Rossellino looks at that block. He looks at Agostino's cuts. He looks at the damage. He spends a while with it, and then he too walks away. The block is, in his assessment, far too compromised. The grain of the marble is imperfect. The proportions, because of the missing section, will be wrong for whatever figure is attempted. He simply abandons it. And so, the block sits for another 25 years, outside the cathedral workshop, exposed to all the elements, slowly weathering. The Florentines give it a name in time, Il Gigante, the giant. But this isn't a term of admiration. It's a description of a problem that they've not been able to solve. By 1500, the block has become a symbol of abject failure, of ambitious plans that ran into the reality of human limitation, of the gap between what a city wants to be and what its artists can actually deliver and achieve. The overseers meet. They discuss options. Sell the marble perhaps. Break it into smaller pieces for other smaller commissions. There's even a suggestion that Leonardo da Vinci, then at the peak of his reputation, might be approached. He was, but he declines. And then someone suggests Michelangelo. Movement 2, the turn. Michelangelo Buonarroti in 1501 is 26 years old. He's not unknown. The Pieta, his breathtaking marble sculpture completed when he was 24, already stands in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and it has made his name across Italy. He is, by contemporary accounts, the most celebrated and the highest paid artist in the country. And yet, he is also, by every account that survives of him, one of the most difficult, most solitary, most internally combustible human beings anyone in Florence has ever tried to work with. He has almost no friends. He sleeps badly, when he sleeps at all, that is. He has a temper that has ended professional relationships and has made powerful patrons take a deep breath before they send for him. He is contemptuous of praise and tormented by imperfection in a way that is physically, visually painful for him. And then this is Florence itself. That is complicated, let's just say, for Michelangelo. The Medici, the family who had been his primary patrons, who had treated him almost like a son, had been overthrown now. The city is now a republic, cautious, politically unstable, and still finding its footing. Michelangelo has returned. He's ambitious. He's, by all contemporary accounts, difficult, isolated, intensely private, and consumed by work in a way that has made him strange even to those who admire him deeply. The overseers offer him that block. And the moment he walks around that gigantic block of marble in that cathedral courtyard, a block of marble so imposing that it would have been terrifying to anyone in their senses, Michelangelo is yet completely, unreasonably, magnificently certain. He's paid 6 gold florins per month, a reasonable but not particularly exceptional sum. The contract specifies that he must produce a figure to be placed on the cathedral's roofline in keeping with the original vision. Movement 3. The build. On the morning of the 13th of September 1501, this date is documented in the archive record. Michelangelo begins work. He does not begin gently. A few days before the official start date, unable to wait, he has already gone and visited that monumental block alone, and with 1 or 2 blows of the chisel, uno vel duo ictibus is the Latin phrase that is used in the commission document, removed a protrusion of the stone's chest that Agostino Duccio had left behind. A knob of marble, an old sculptor's reference mark. Michelangelo struck it off clean before he was even officially given the contract. That is the kind of man that we are dealing with here. He builds a wooden wall around that large block. The courtyard of the cathedral workshop is open to all the elements, which means so is Michelangelo. The archive record maintains plainly that when it rained, Michelangelo worked soaking wet. He did not stop for the rain. He did not stop for the cold. He did not stop for anything. The Florentines walking past the cathedral wall could hear the sound of iron on marble, rhythmic and relentless, and they knew something was happening. They could not see it. Nobody could see it. That was the rule. His rule. Now I want you to understand what this work actually looked like, because the word sculpting doesn't quite carry the weight of what Michelangelo was actually doing. To begin with, he made his own steel chisels. Not bought, made with his own hands, to his own specifications, because no existing tool was precise enough for what he needed to create what was in his mind. He began with a subia, a heavy pointed iron implement like a spike that was struck with a mallet. This is brute work. Every blow of the subia breaks off chunks of marble, roughing out the gross mass of figure, removing the stone that is most obviously not David. At this stage, the figure is entirely invisible. You're watching a man basically attack a mountain. When enough of that mass is gone, he moves to the calcanuo olo, a shorter blade with 2 teeth, to begin modeling the form. Then he moves on to the gradina, a serrated claw chisel with 3 teeth, whose marks can still be seen in Michelangelo's unfinished sculptures in Florence today. The gradina is where the figure begins to finally emerge, where a shoulder becomes recognizably a shoulder, where a leg begins to carry the suggestion of weight and muscle. And then for the finest work, the curls of David's hair, the pupil of his eyes, the vein that runs along his right hand, he uses the trapano, a drill that is worked with a bow, exactly like the ancient Romans used it. The drill bites into the marble to create the deep shadows that make the hair seem to move, that make the eyes seem to catch focus. 4 tools, each one deployed at the right moment, in the right sequence, across 2.5 years of unbroken work. But here is the part that his biographer Ascanio Condivi records, and Condivi was close enough to Michelangelo to know that takes this from craft into something closer to obsession. Before he even touched the marble, Michelangelo built a wax model of his design, and then he submerged it in water. And as he worked on the full-scale stone, he would slowly, incrementally let the water level drop, revealing the model piece by piece from the highest points of relief downwards. He was sculpting what he could see emerging from the water. He was teaching himself to see the figure appearing from within, because Michelangelo believed, and said this plainly in his own words that survive to this day, that the figure was already in the stone, that it had always been there, that his job was not to impose a form on the marble, but to release the form that was trapped inside it. Every block of stone, he said, has a statue inside it, and it is the task of the sculptor to discover it and release it. This was not poetry, this was his working method. And while all of this is happening, while he's soaked in the rain, while he's striking the subia in the dark, while he's drilling the curls of a 17-foot man's hair with a bow and a rod of iron, he's barely sleeping, barely eating. His biographer records that when he did sleep, he slept in his clothes, in his boots. The same dogskin boots worn so continuously and so completely that, according to Vasari, when he finally removed them, the skin of his legs came away with it, like a snake shedding its skin. He did not remove his boots for weeks at a time. He did not stop to eat proper meals. He barely spoke to anyone. The wooden wall stood, the rain fell, the chisel ran. And inside that wall, inside that wet, cold, stone-dusted courtyard, David was being born. Michelangelo worked in this state of total immersion for more than 2 years. He then made a decision. He would show the work, not to the public, not to Florence, but to the men who had commissioned it, the vestry board. Pier Soderini, the head of the Florentine Republic, a private reveal. In January 1504, the wall came down. The records of what happened in that courtyard when the members of the vestry board first came to see the David do not survive in precise detail. But what we know is this: within weeks of that private viewing, they had convened a committee of 30 of the most distinguished minds in Florence to decide what to do with it, because it was immediately, inescapably obvious that this statue could not go on the cathedral roofline. It was not that it was too heavy, though it was at 8.5 tons. It was not that it was too tall, though at 17 feet you could barely see it from the ground 260 feet below. It was something far simpler and more profound than either of those things. It was just simply too good to be hidden. The committee included Leonardo da Vinci, Sandro Botticelli, Filippino Lippo, Giuliano da Sangalano. 9 possible locations were debated over months by these people. In the end, they chose the Piazza della Signora, the very heart of Florentine civic life, where every citizen of Florence walks past that piece every day, in front of the seat of government. And they installed David there as a statement to the world, not as a religious object, as a political one, as a symbol of what Florence was and what it was willing to defend. And then came the move. On the night of the 14th of May 1504, at midnight, they began. An archway of the workshop had to be demolished. The David, you see, was too large to pass through any existing opening. Then the statue was suspended inside a wooden cage, hung from ropes, and placed on a platform of greased wooden beams. 40 men, working in shifts, pushed and guided that platform through the cobbled streets of Florence. Half a mile. It took them 4 days. People threw stones at it at night, moralists who were offended by the nudity. So guards had to patrol around the clock. The city was watching clearly. And then on the 8th of June 1504, David arrived in the Piazza della Signora. Michelangelo continued to work on it for another 3 months, finishing, refining, polishing, gliding the slingshot and the laurel wreath, before the official public unveiling on the 8th of September 1504. Florence saw it and felt completely, irreversibly silent, in awe. It would stand there for more than 360 years. Movement 4, the consequence. Today, the David stands in the Galleria della Accademia in Florence, where it was moved in 1873 for the sake of protection. More than 1 million people visit it every single year. It is, by the consensus of art historians, architects, and anyone who has actually ever stood in its presence, the most technically perfect large-scale sculpture ever produced by a human being. Sure, the hands are disproportionately large, but that's deliberately so. You see, at 17 feet, the figure is viewed from below, and Michelangelo had calculated the proportions to account for the viewer's angle of sight. Would you believe it? The veins on the right hand are raised because that hand is tensed, gripping the stone. The left hand, holding the sling, is relaxed. Every detail was thought through to a degree of precision that would require some sort of advanced engineering software to replicate today. And here is the fact that I find most extraordinary of all. When conservators first examined David in depth in the 20th century, they discovered that the block's internal flaws, the imperfections in the grain that had caused Rossellino to walk away, are located almost entirely outside the figure. Michelangelo had read the marble, understood where the flaws ran through the stone, and carved David around them. He did not overcome the block's imperfections. He saw them and he designed his masterpiece to exist in the spaces between them. And if this wasn't enough, I also want you to consider how Michelangelo decided to present David. Every early artist who depicted David showed him after the victory, triumphant, Goliath's head near his feet. Michelangelo showed him before. That slight turn of the head, the sling over his shoulder, those extraordinary hands. And if you look at his face, really just look at his face, what you see is not courage. What you see is a man who is afraid. And he's going to go ahead and do what he has to anyway. That is not an accident. That is Michelangelo telling you something about what bravery actually is. That is him telling us all through the ages to step up and do what we must, to be what we must be, to become what we were born for. The block that nobody wanted, the commission that two sculptors abandoned, the stone that sat in a courtyard for 26 years in the rain became this. I keep coming back to that moment. Michelangelo walking around that monumental block, looking at the damage, looking at what two other men, two very talented men, had taken a look at and decided was reason enough to quit, and deciding that for him, this was the point of beginning. I think about all the things that we walk away from because they seem too compromised, too damaged, too far away from what we imagined they were supposed to be. Like the project that got off to a bad start, the relationship that has some history, the career that took a wrong turn somewhere along the way. We look at those flaws and all we see are limitations. We see the gap between where we are and where we wanted to be. Michelangelo looked at this giant, daunting block of stone with a hole in it, a gaping hole, a hole that another man had put there, that had nothing to do with Michelangelo's own decisions. And he saw the specific shape of what could exist in the space that remained. The detail about the internal flaws of that marble undoes me every single time I think about it. He didn't fight the imperfections. He found the spaces between them and he built something immortal in those very spaces. There's a lesson in that for each one of us. I'm not sure I can state it more clearly than the statue already states. If possible, go to Florence and stand in front of David and look at his face. That face that is afraid and committed all at the same time. And tell me it doesn't say everything that needs to be said about what it costs to make something real. The block sat for 26 years because two skilled men looked at it and saw what was wrong with it. One man looked at it and saw David. This was the story of the world's most famous sculpture and how it nearly never got made and what we all can learn from it. My name is Arvind Vijay Mohan and I'll see you on the next